Don't sound so smug, Reese. My mother's voice sliced through the clatter of good china, and every head at the table turned toward me, like I'd spilled wine on the tablecloth. You'd think after everything we've given you, you could pretend to be grateful for once. We were in my grandfather's dining room in Muskoka, the lake gone silver gray, through the big windows, everyone bundled in cashmere, because the fireplace was more decoration than heat source. My grandfather, Desmond, had just pulled 3 envelopes from his jacket pocket like he did every Thanksgiving, a little ritual nobody took seriously anymore. Inside mine was a check, $22,000, made out to me in his shaky, looping handwriting. Before I could even register the number, my mother plucked it right out of my fingers. She laughed, that thin, glassy laugh she saved for moments she wanted to humiliate someone in front of an audience. "Oh, Dad, honestly," she said, waving the check like it was a napkin that needed refolding. "You know these come from the old Sun Life account. It's closed. It's been closed for years. Don't get her hopes up over Monopoly money." My brother Colton didn't even blink. He crumpled his into a ball one-handed and lobbed it toward the fireplace, missing, so it just sat there smoking faintly on the hearthstones. "Nice one, Grandpa," he said, with that easy, careless grin he'd had since he was 6 years old and got away with everything. My cousin Brinley did the same with hers, folding it into a little paper airplane and sailing it under the table. I didn't move. I looked at my grandfather. He was hunched in his armchair the way he always was lately, wrapped in that ratty Hudson's Bay blanket he refused to let anyone throw out, his hands trembling around his water glass. Frail thing. Foggy. Everyone at that table had decided, collectively, without ever saying it out loud, that Desmond Whitlock wasn't all there anymore. But for 1/2 second, before he ducked his head back down, he winked at me. I said nothing. I reached across the table, picked the check up from where my mother had tossed it face down near the gravy boat, folded it in half, and slid it into the inside pocket of my blazer. My face stayed flat. My heart was going like a rabbit's. "Tell me something. Have you ever been the only person in a room who knew a truth everyone else had agreed to bury?" I'd love to hear it in the comments, because that night, driving back to my apartment in the city, that question was the only thing keeping me sane. I didn't sleep. I set the check on my kitchen counter, under the one good light I had, and just stared at it until 2 a.m., turning it over like it might change its mind and become nothing. At 9:03 the next morning, the second the branch on Bloor opened, I was standing at the counter with my coat still zipped to my chin. I didn't wait for a teller to be free. I walked up to the first available one, a woman named Priya with a lanyard full of pins, and slid the check across. "I need this verified, please," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. My hands were freezing, and it wasn't the weather. Priya typed. She frowned slightly, the way people do when a computer takes longer than they expect, then typed again, longer this time. I held my breath waiting for her to slide it back across the counter with an apologetic little frown, tell me it was drawn on a dead account, that my mother had been right to laugh. "It's good," Priya said instead, stamping it without any drama at all. "Funds available same day. Would you like that as a bank draft or deposit to your checking?" I stared at the little printed slip. Balance, $22,384.16. The $384 was mine, scraped together from 3 months of freelance invoicing nobody had paid on time. The $22,000 was Desmond's. It was real. I sat in my Corolla in the parking lot on Bloor Street with the engine ticking and just breathed for a while. It wasn't life-altering money to my parents. My father dropped more than that on a fishing trip to the Yukon 2 winters ago. But to me, sitting in that car with frost creeping up the windshield, it was air. And it was proof of something I hadn't let myself say out loud yet. You have to understand the accounting of my family to understand why a $22,000 check could feel like an earthquake. In the Whitlock house, money was never just money. It was leverage. It was a leash you didn't know you were wearing until you pulled against it. I grew up hearing we were comfortable. Comfortable enough for a cottage in Muskoka, comfortable enough for my mother's furs, comfortable enough for my father's boat. But when I needed something, a laptop for my design courses at OCAD, help with textbooks, a used car that actually started in February, the well went dry overnight. I remember, 2 winters ago, living in a bachelor apartment above a dry cleaner on DuPont, the whole place smelling faintly of solvent, no matter how many candles I burned. I was eating instant noodles more nights than I'd admit, because I was paying out of pocket for Adobe licenses to keep freelancing while I finished school. I asked my father for a loan, $1,500, just enough for a graphics tablet that wouldn't die mid-project. He'd looked at me over the top of his readers, and sighed like I'd asked him to co-sign a mortgage. "Reese, we don't just hand out money in this family. You need to learn the value of a dollar. If your little art thing can't pay for itself, maybe it's time you got a real job." 4 days later, Colton pulled into our parents' driveway in a brand new Ford Bronco, sticker price north of 70 grand. He didn't have a job. He had a concept for a craft brewery that had been launching for 2 years. When I brought it up to my mother, she'd waved a hand at me like I was a fly at a picnic. "That's an investment in his image, Reese. He needs to look successful to attract partners you wouldn't understand. You don't have a head for business. You don't have a head for business." That phrase was the cage they kept me in. They used it to explain everything. Why Colton got the truck. Why my father's boat got serviced twice a summer. Why nobody blinked when my mother replaced her entire kitchen for the 3rd time. And they used it to explain why they were holding my grandmother's trust for me. $710,000, left specifically to me in what my mother called a protective arrangement, because I was, in her words, too creative to be trusted with real money. They said they were shielding me from myself, from inflation, from my own bad judgment. Sitting in that frozen car on Bloor Street, staring at a deposit slip, it all clicked into place at once. The Bronco. The endless trips to Naples every February. The money quietly poured into Colton's brewery that never brewed a single batch. It wasn't family money. It was mine. They weren't protecting me from anything. They were protecting their lifestyle from the fact that it was never really theirs to spend. I looked at that receipt one more time, and I didn't feel the relief I'd expected walking in. I felt something colder and much clearer than relief. They'd always treated me like I just made pretty things, like being a designer meant I colored inside other people's lines. They forgot that my actual job is noticing the one pixel that's out of place. My job is seeing the structure underneath the surface everyone else takes at face value. And for the first time in my life, I stopped looking at them as my parents, and started looking at them as a problem I was qualified to solve. I drove straight up to Desmond's cabin. Not the big lodge where everyone else was staying that weekend, but his own smaller place tucked back in the pines, the one my mother avoided because she said it smelled like mothballs and old dog. The door was unlocked, the way it always was. I found him in his study, in the chair by the window, watching the lake go from gray to black. He didn't seem frail anymore. He looked like a man who'd been waiting for someone to knock. "You went to the bank," he said, without turning around. "It cleared," I told him from the doorway. $22,000. "Why did you go?" Desmond asked, finally turning his chair to face me. His eyes were sharp behind his glasses, none of the fog he wore like a costume around my parents, clear as the lake in August. "Because I needed to know if anyone left in this family still had a spine," I said. "Colton burned his, Brinley burned hers. You kept yours." He nodded slowly, gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Sit, Reese. We don't have long before someone notices you're gone." "The trust," I said, once I'd sat. "It's gone, isn't it?" He let out a long breath, the kind that seems to cost something on the way out. "I suspect so. Your grandmother left that money for you specifically. $710,000, meant to be released when you turned 26. Your father told me you'd asked to defer it. Showed me emails supposedly from you, saying you weren't ready for that kind of responsibility yet." "I never wrote those," I said, my voice gone flat and cold. "I believe you," he said. "But believing isn't proof. I'm 81, Reese, not stupid, but if I accuse them without something solid, they'll have a doctor declare me incompetent before I finish the sentence. They're already talking about power of attorney behind my back." My phone buzzed against my leg, a text from my mother. "Where did you disappear to?" "Colton needs the label mock-ups for the brewery pitch by Monday. Don't be difficult." I turned the screen toward Desmond. He read it and made a small, disgusted sound in his throat. "Difficult. That's their word for you whenever you stop being useful, isn't it? If I don't do it, they cut me off," I said. "They still pay my phone plan. They co-signed my apartment lease." "Let them cut you off," he said. "You have $22,000 now. That's more freedom than you've had in years." I looked at the text again. Label mock-ups. For years I'd designed their Christmas cards, Colton's endless rebrands for a brewery that made nothing, my mother's charity gala invitations, all free, all while being told my hobby wasn't a real career. I typed back one word. "No." The reply came instantly, 3 dots pulsing like something furious. Then, "Excuse me? Who exactly do you think pays for your life? We put a roof over your head for 20 years and this is the thanks we get. Don't bother coming for Christmas if this is how you're going to behave." Something shifted in my chest reading that. It wasn't fear, and it wasn't the old, familiar guilt either. It felt like a heavy winter coat finally sliding off my shoulders after months of wearing it indoors. "I need you to do something," Desmond said, leaning forward over his desk. "I'm going to call a family meeting. Tell them I want to transfer the estate early, avoid probate, all that. But I'll insist on a clean accounting of the trust fund first, done properly, in front of my lawyer." "I need you there." "They'll fake it," I said. "They'll fabricate documents." "I'm counting on it," he said, and something like a grim smile crossed his face. "That's exactly what we need them to do." He didn't explain further, but I understood. He wasn't asking me to fight them directly, he was asking me to stand back and watch them build their own gallows. I looked at my phone one last time, a fresh wall of insults blooming across the screen. Ungrateful, selfish, spoiled. I turned it face down on his desk, and looked at my grandfather instead. "I'm in," I said. The plan was almost embarrassingly simple, which is exactly why it worked. Desmond picked up his landline and dialed my father, speaker on so I could hear every word. "Gordon," he said, and his voice trembled just enough to sound like an old man losing his grip, rather than a man setting a trap. "I've been thinking. I don't know how much time I've got left in me. I want to transfer the estate to you and Sandra now. Save everyone the probate mess later." I could practically hear my father's pulse quicken through the phone. "Dad, that's incredibly wise of you. We can come by this afternoon, sign whatever's needed." "Not yet," Desmond cut in. "Sterling wants a clean audit first, just a formality for the lawyers. Bring the statements for Reese's trust to his office tomorrow at noon, show everything's been managed properly, and once he signs off, the whole estate is yours." There was a pause on the line, thick enough to taste. "Of course," my father said, a beat too quickly. "We have all the records. We'll be there." Desmond hung up and looked at me. "Now we wait." I didn't wait quietly. Back at my apartment, I opened my laptop. For close to a decade, I'd been the family's unpaid IT department, setting up everyone's phones, their Wi-Fi, their cloud backups, because nobody else in that house could be bothered to remember a new password. They'd never thought to change any of it, because they'd never really thought of me as someone capable of understanding what she was looking at. You don't hide things from the help, you just assume the help won't notice. I logged into the shared family cloud drive. For an hour, nothing. Then the digital scrambling began. File after file syncing in real time, like watching a crime scene get staged from orbit. Upload. rbc-stammertaporter.jpg. Upload. trustsami1.bx. Upload. trustsami2 BDF. They didn't have real records, because the money hadn't existed in that account for years. So they did the only thing they actually knew how to do. They manufactured a version of reality that suited them. At 11:52 that night, one last file appeared. Trustkund statement saml a3.bdf. I downloaded it immediately. To an ordinary person, it looked flawless. The RBC logo in the corner, the right branch address, the right formatting down to the fine print. Balance. 710,412.88. Convincing. Airtight. But I'm not an ordinary person. I stare at grids and typefaces for a living. To me, a document isn't just information, it's a structure, and structures have rules. I opened the PDF in Illustrator and started zooming in. 200, 400, 800%, and there it was. The arrogance of the amateur. Classic Dunning-Kruger, the kind where someone is too unskilled to even recognize how unskilled they are. My parents thought design was just doodling on a screen. They never respected the actual discipline of it, so they never learned its rules. RBC uses a specific proprietary sans serif on their statements, a particular weight depending on the year the template was issued. The numbers on this one, the balance line specifically, were set in plain Calibri. I toggled the alignment grid. The 7 in 710,000 was floating 2 pixels above the baseline. The kerning between digits was uneven, sloppy, the spacing of someone who'd copy-pasted numbers over an old screenshot and called it a day. I checked the file's metadata. Created yesterday, 11:47 p.m. application. Adobe Photoshop CC. Author, Gordon Laptop. They hadn't just lied. They'd stamped their own fingerprints all over the forgery, so confident that Desmond was too far gone and I was too irrelevant to ever check. I saved the file to a flash drive. I saved the metadata report separately, printed both, and called Desmond. They took the bait, I told him. Did they do a good job, he asked. No, I said. They used Calibri. He actually laughed at that. A real laugh. The first one I'd heard from him in years. See you in the boardroom, he said. Sterling's office occupied the 18th floor of a glass tower on Bay Street. All dark wood and floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over a city half swallowed in a February whiteout. Inside, though, it was warm and still, the kind of quiet that cost $400 an hour. I sat in the corner near the AV cart, laptop closed on my knees, trying to look like exactly what everyone assumed I was. The niece who did the slideshows. Mr. Sterling sat at the head of the long table, a man who clearly billed in 15-minute increments even in his sleep. Desmond sat to his right, small in his cardigan, hands trembling slightly against the polished wood, playing his part perfectly. At noon exactly, the doors opened and my parents walked in like they were boarding a yacht that belonged to them. My mother had on a coat that cost more than a semester of my tuition. My father wore a suit clearly bought for this exact meeting, brushing snow off his shoulders with the mild irritation of a man inconvenienced by weather that dared exist. Neither of them looked at me. To them, I wasn't a participant in this room. I was equipment, like the projector. Sorry we're late, my father announced, taking the seat across from Desmond. He didn't sound sorry. He sounded like a man who'd already spent the inheritance in his head twice over. The 4-1 was a disaster. But we brought everything. He slid a thick binder across the table. It landed with a heavy, satisfied thud. The full accounting, my father said, flashing a smile with more teeth than warmth. You'll be pleased, Dad. The trust's actually grown under our management, sitting at just over 710,000. We've been conservative with it, obviously, protecting Reese's future. Desmond didn't touch the binder. He fussed with his glasses, hands shaking just enough to sell it. My eyes aren't what they were, he murmured. Numbers blur these days. I can summarize it for you, my mother offered quickly, reaching for the folder. No, Desmond said, waving a hand toward me instead. Reese, put it up on the screen, I want to see it big. Clearly. My father hesitated for exactly 1 second, then relaxed because to him I was still just tech support, not a threat worth considering. Go ahead, he said as I plugged in my laptop. Don't embarrass us, my mother hissed under her breath as I connected the cable. Just do the slideshow properly for once. I'm good with visuals, I said, perfectly calm. The document filled the screen, all 80 inches of it. $710,000, clean and convincing in 12-point Calibri. Everything's in order, my father said, folding his hands. It looks impressive, Desmond agreed, leaning forward like he meant it. I let the silence sit there a moment, then I spoke. You always told me design was just drawing pictures, I said. Let me actually show you what it is. I zoomed in, the balance line filled the wall. This 7 is floating 2 pixels above the baseline, I said. That's a copy-paste error, not a typesetting choice. A red alignment grid appeared over the numbers, then a blue outline traced the font. Calibri, I said, default word font, created in Photoshop CC. Not a font library on Earth belonging to a bank. I overlaid a second sample in green. And this is the actual typeface RBC uses on real statements. Different curves, different kerning entirely. Yours doesn't match. The room went completely still. You built this, I said. You didn't get it from a bank. You're twisting things, my mother snapped, her voice climbing. She's manipulating the file somehow. Let's ask the file itself, I said and pulled up the metadata. Created last night, 11:47 p.m. application. Photoshop CC. Author. Gordon Laptop. My father's face went the color of the snow outside. You forged a financial document, I said quietly. That's fraud, and now it's on record. My mother lunged for her phone. Call who? Desmond said, and for the first time all afternoon his voice came out perfectly steady, not a tremor anywhere in it. I asked Reese to run this audit because I already suspected you'd stolen from her. I only needed the proof. We borrowed it, my father said, so quietly it barely carried. For Colton's brewery. We were going to put it back. Mr. Sterling opened his own binder without hurry. There's a standard no contest clause in the trust documents, he said. Fraud voids any claim to inheritance automatically. He closed it with a soft final click. You haven't just admitted to stealing $710,000 from your daughter. You've disinherited yourselves from an estate worth roughly $20 million. Security walked them out 10 minutes later. My mother grabbed my sleeve on the way past. We're your family, she said, like that still meant something in that room. No, I said, quiet enough that only she heard it. I'm just the help, and the help just quit. Later, out in the hallway, Desmond put a hand on my shoulder. You're allowed to grieve this, he said. Clarity's expensive. It costs you every illusion you were living inside. He was right about that. 6 months on, the Muskoka Lodge sold to a couple from Toronto who gutted the kitchen within a month. Every cent got repaid, down to the last dollar, under court order. I started my own consulting practice now. Forensic document review for law firms across the GTA. Work I never once imagined turning into a career back when I was surviving on instant noodles above a dry cleaner. Desmond and I spent this past Christmas in Victoria, walking along the harbor in coats that were finally warm enough. My mother called 2 weeks ago. I let it ring out, and went back to work. Competence doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be the last thing standing.